Welcome back, everyone, to the ISL Politics Podcast. Today will be our first episode with me, Dante, and my co-host, Luca, who is in 11th grade like I am. On today's episode, we will be talking about recent conflicts related to Iran and other major news development this week.
Okay, well, welcome back, everybody. So Dante, first question of the podcast. Let's talk a bit about you, your political views. How do you align? Compared.
Well, on the political compass, I'm quite centrist. Tiny bit to the left, like 0.8. And yeah, that's it.
All right. Okay, well then, if that's the case, let's get right into our first segment, news recap. So in this opening segment, we will look at the BBC 1 Minute News, and after the clip, we will talk about the events mentioned in it for a bit, and as a sort of warm-up to the rest of today's episode. So I have the clip right here. Let's play it, and then Dante, if you want to add opinions after the clip, feel free to go ahead.
Watching BBC World News, our headlines. Tens of thousands of people have taken to the Iraqi capital Baghdad, calling for US forces to be expelled. Washington's assassination of the Iranian military commander Qasem Soleimani a few weeks ago in Baghdad has fueled these recent tensions. The WHO says China's response to the coronavirus outbreak has been an improvement on the last health emergency, SARS, 17 years ago. Only 6 people have died so far in the latest outbreak. The UN has appealed for aid to combat what it calls an unprecedented and alarming threat to food security in East Africa posed by huge swarms of desert locusts. The insects came across the Red Sea from Yemen. And the US tennis star Serena Williams has failed in her bid to win a record equalling 24th Grand Slam title at the Australian Open.
All right, I think we have some few important ones, and then there's just Serena Williams.
Well, actually, it's interesting as you talk about it, because in the Australian Open, the athletes needed breathalyzers to help them with the ashes of the wildfires, because
really?
they couldn't breathe correctly. They couldn't breathe correctly due to the ashes and stuff. It's actually a thing. And
why wouldn't they just change the venue?
I guess it was too expensive or something.
Oh, okay.
I'm not too sure.
No, but okay, wait. So based on the first thing that we have here, first event. Okay, Iraq anti-U.S. protests. So of course, this is related to the recent tensions between the Iran and the U.S. And I mean, it's interesting because of course. You find it? Wait, hold on. What did you? Okay, this is about the tennis. Okay, this is about Australian Open. We can go ahead back to the Iraq thing later, but So Dante has just pulled up an article. So tennis players are using breathalyzers and various other things to help them breathe because of the sheer amount of ash.
Smoke and
So I mean that's a bit. I mean, it'll be interesting to see because, maybe the results could be kind of skewed towards a few people because some of the top athletes aren't performing at their best.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, it'd be interesting to see. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they could have. I don't know if they could have changed the location of the venue. However, that would have probably seemed the wisest to me because the wildfires have been going on for like a few weeks at this point.
Yeah.
So it seems foolish. It seems badly planned, and usually, I mean, I don't know. Serena Williams is. Yeah. So I mean, what's interesting is that Serena Williams, she caused a huge controversy in the last tournament she played. So it'll be interesting to see what she does for the Australian Open because she caused a massive controversy. So I mean, back to the 1 minute world news. So what do you think? What do you think is like when it comes to the Iraqi anti-U.S. protest? Like, do you think it's because I think the main thing we got to ask ourselves is this an actual legitimate protest by a people, or is this really something that maybe is being assisted by Iran, who might want to weaken the USA's image in the Middle East?
Well, I definitely believe that brainwashes them with a lot of communist or authoritarian propaganda to hate Western countries, especially the US, since it has a massive influence in the Middle East and Muslim countries. And with the recent wars going on in Afghanistan and Iraq, definitely something's going on that Iran doesn't like, and it is quite justified when they try to missile strike and kill some American soldiers, but I don't think they managed, to be fair. And then the obviously
because all of this is related to the missile strikes,
and obviously now every single airplane due to the Ukrainian Airlines crash is now avoiding Iranian airspace due to
what was kind of really mind-boggling is that I think a day after the U.S. Assassination of the General Qasem, there was the Iraqi parliament literally wrote a resolution that demanded that foreign troops leave the country, and that was kind of mind-blowing to me, because the fact it kind of showed that they were kind of working in cahoots with Iran, because a day after, and you respond basically doing exactly what Iran wants. So it's interesting because we don't hear about Iraq that much anymore. Yeah. Because there was a lot of coverage on it, of course, during the war in Iraq. However, it's slowed down, and I think that's maybe a mistake, because clearly from the recent protests and plus the actions of Iraq's own parliament, it's clear that there's a lot of Iranian influence in there, and there's a lot of dangers that comes from that influence existing in the first place.
Well, I believe a lot of Muslim countries think alike. They don't like democracy, Western countries. They don't like being influenced, especially. So they don't really kind of hesitate with the country. But when the country is inside of them and trying to change their whole ideology
the whole
and
system,
influence their whole system, that's when they get even angrier, and it's just it creates a lot of backlash, to be fair.
Right. The second news story that was on the BBC in the recap was about this plague, about the virus. So I've read some interesting news about it. Apparently there can't, because this is coming close to Chinese New Year's.
Yeah. And
so China has a lot of worries. I've seen it. There's actually an interesting thing, because people are like, well, there's multiple ways of looking at this, right?
Yeah.
You can look at this economically, because in the way it relates to China, this could be devastating.
Yeah.
Like, let's not undersell this. I mean, we don't know whether the World Health Organization is going to call this a pandemic or an outbreak, or something where international action needs to be taken. But if this makes China look weak internally, right? or if it causes enough economic damage, or if it costs the Chinese government a lot of money to be able to treat this, then that might cause problems, because it would definitely create a terrible portrayal of China throughout the world.
Yeah.
And I mean, it remains to see how China's going to handle this.
Yeah.
Because if they mishandle this, then that carries with it a bunch of its own consequences.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. 11 million people city was, I think, locked down. All public transport.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Was,
China is
Wuhan, was it?
It's Wuhan. It started in Wuhan.
Yeah, and I've actually seen recently, I think it was a couple hours ago, they're starting to build a massive hospital. They've got a ton of mechanized units. They're digging up the ground, creating infrastructure for it, because they're really desperate to try and solve this problem. It's not something that they're just gonna let go, quite easily, and they want to solve it as soon as they can, because now it's slowly spreading around to other countries. As I think there was one case reported in Australia and one more in
I've
the
heard.
US. Yeah.
But I mean, it's interesting. I mean, what interests me especially is the way it could relate to Hong Kong. Hong Kong might try to push further towards independence, while China is busy focusing on itself. And it's also interesting to see to what extent it's going to actually spread globally, and what has caused that global spread. Because a lot of people are saying, oh well, pandemics and outbreaks are now much more common and much more effective.
Yeah.
Because the world is so interconnected. So I mean, maybe we'll see a lot of criticism of, how global our world is after this outbreak if it becomes worse.
Yeah.
Due to the fact that, people will, a lot of people will play the blame game. What caused this? What is the biggest cause? And what should we take away from it? But
I don't think there's anyone to blame. It's just it's just something that you can't really avoid in any way. You just have to hope for the best and treat it as best as you can. There's no one to really blame about it.
I mean, there are reports that this, because it's interesting, because China especially has a lot of problems in its agriculture, because a lot of people think this came from agriculture. Like they're still trying to confirm the source of the outbreak. They have a few theories, right? It's snakes, right? If I heard correct. Yeah, no, I don't know, but there are questions about how did the outbreak occur specifically? Because that could mean a lot in terms of how to deal with it and how we interpret it. What lesson can we get from this?
Yeah. Well, about Africa, I actually didn't know about that until you told me right now.
Wait, what do you mean?
About the
locusts.
Yeah, the locust.
Okay. So this is the next article that was in the BBC. So yeah, locust plague, as they are describing it.
Yeah, I had no idea actually that happened. That's interesting.
I mean, it's interesting to see how underreported usually Africa is compared to a lot of continents.
Yeah, that's actually true.
And so I mean that's worrying because you're already talking about a region that has a lot of food insecurity.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this kind of relates a lot to maybe because a lot of aid has already been given, right? A lot of aid has already been given to Africa. However, you're seeing not a lot of actual improvement, right? It creates a lot of dependency, in my opinion. And so it'll be interesting to see it'll be interesting to see, how bad does the locust plague make it, right? How terrible of a result is it possibly going to get to?
I'm guessing if it's so unreported, then maybe it isn't that major. It's just something that has happened recently, and now they're kind of telling you. But I guess if it gets worse, it'll obviously get way more reported. Just I think now it's just.
That leads to bigger questions about how do we help underdeveloped regions? Should we help them at all? And to what extent? That's a question, right? Because we've seen in the past decades huge amounts of money being given to African countries. We've seen, up to trillions and trillions of dollars have been going towards helping Africa and helping underdeveloped nations.
Yeah.
And
no, but actually I agree with you because, for example, even China has helped invest a lot in African infrastructure. Yeah. But I think that's mainly because of the
interest
internationalism that China wants to how do you say enter, if you know what I mean, because
they want to expand
a very
into
closed up country in the past years, and it still kind of is to a certain extent with the Western culture
when it comes to its internal.
What they're trying right now, they realize, damn, the US has got so many bases around Africa, around the Middle East, so they're trying to realize now, maybe we can do the same, kind of help them out, get some more bases, get some more allies, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah,
and
it's
definitely.
Definitely.
How do you say it? Get some more influence over the world because they're really a solitary country. And it's helpful for them because they actually are a long-term party. So you don't really, there's no elections. So you can easily strive for long-term decisions because it's possible. While, for example, the US can't do that because they've only got 4-year office.
Go for it.
4-year office terms. So you can't really strive for helping out, do this, do that.
No, but I think what's more interesting, what is more interesting, right, is that will China use this, right, as will they use this plague and this sudden weakening of that region as an opportunity to maybe offer them help?
Yeah.
And thereby expanding their influence.
Well, the thing also that China has an advantage on is how all the banks are state-owned. Therefore, if the banks, if Africa wants investment, then if Africa wants to ask for investors, China can easily do that because they can ask any bank to just do it because they're state owned.
I mean
While,
that it's
and there's no really like limits for it, you know.
no,
It's
but
government controlled basically.
I mean here's the thing. My knowledge about the financial sector and banks is not, you know, I don't want to argue with you when it comes to like, you know, banking and stuff. However, you know what? No, I'm gonna bring it back to something I think is more interesting because, you know, in geography, for example, we've talked about stuff like the New Development Bank, right? That BRICS has created, and it's interesting to see maybe because actually recently a Chinese citizen has become the leader of the New Development Bank, and so it's interesting to see that, you know, is China going to use that institution to give out loans to African countries?
Well, I've got here a graph, and it says even though China is 5th biggest right now.
All right, yeah.
If you look down, if you scroll down 1, 2, 3, 4 to the 9th position, there's Hong Kong, and Hong Kong is bigger than India in investing.
In investments, yeah.
So
okay.
it just China's
yes.
not
So
yet
we're
a
so
superpower in
hold
investing,
on.
but definitely they have a potential that they can achieve.
Yeah, based on 2017 figures. Based on 2017 figures, currently Hong Kong gives more. It seems more. Yeah, foreign direct investment to Africa than the entirety of India, which is understandable, in some ways. But I mean, it's interesting to see if China has the capacity to upset, you know, current like Western, you know, hold over that region.
Yeah.
But okay, so let's move on to a new segment called Thinkers of the World, where we'll look at some important figures that throughout history have shaped political philosophy. And so today we'll be dissecting the writing and philosophy of French politician Alexis de Tocqueville, who was very active during the 19th century, and who mainly actually, even though he was a Frenchman, focused on the United States and its form of governments. Now, he is known for two main themes. One, writing about democracy in America, which is where the title of his first major work comes from. And, of course, he wrote a lot about the French Revolution, based on his work, The Old Regime and the Revolution. So I want to explore some of the ideas that he puts forward and try to gauge both our opinions on it. So I'll just read from thegreatfingers.org, which is the site we are using for this. So Tocqueville explains the origins and character of modern life in the Christian universe, which he believes is dominated by a single fact: the equality of conditions, or democracy. Tocqueville understands democracy not merely as self-government, but as a comprehensive way of life. In his writings, he explains the effects of democracy on the theoretical and practical habits of men in democratic times, focusing on the salubrious as well as the troubling. He prescribes as much as he describes, and suggests how political and intellectual greatness, subject to risks in democratic times, might nonetheless be preserved. Above all, he seeks to turn the attention of his readers to questions of intellectual and political freedom. So that's the main thing, that's the main point behind a lot of what Tocqueville wrote, is that democracy is not only a form of government, but it's a form of life. Because he famously wrote in his book a lot about all the different places where he had been told that American power comes from. All right, and he writes in Democracy in America that those were all lies, and that the only place where he found the true source of American power was inside its churches. Now, that might be a controversial topic, because of course a lot of modern democracies are secular countries, right? There's a separation between, you know, religion and state. So I was just wondering what kind of, do you agree with what he's saying? Do you kind of understand where he's coming from? Like, what do you...
Yeah, no, I agree with most of the things he says. He looks like a guy that knows his democratic stuff.
An interesting question is, right? Because in his works, he talks about how religion has influenced and led to democracy. I don't know if you agree with that or not. However, I guess my question to you would be that do you think if religion helps create democracy and stuff like that, do you think there should still be a separation between, just church and state?
I don't think religion creates democracies.
Mm-hmm.
I think, other than I guess maybe some religions have different tendencies and different roles
Mm-hmm.
for men, women, castes. But I don't think, for example, let's get Christianity. Most states that are democratic are Christian.
You would say that you would say that there's a Christian foundation under it.
No, I'm not saying that all democracies or democracy as an ideology comes from the Christian religion.
Mm-hmm.
I think it comes from any religion possible. It just depends on how the religion has been adapted in the country
Mm-hmm.
that the political party's in.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think, for example, let's take the 1930s.
Mm-hmm.
Fascism was on the rise, and most of the countries were Christian.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't tell me now that
Mm-hmm.
democracy rules in Christian countries, because it's mostly what the people want, past experiences of the people of the country, different issues with different people. Even though they're the same religion, it doesn't change upon religions.
That's a good so even though the two people might be from the same religion, you're saying that in a lot of cases, for example, economical or social factors come in and still create a bit of tension, you would say.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay.
For a country to be, there's no really party associated with any religion.
Mm-hmm.
But for example, let's take Russia. Russia was Orthodox.
Mm-hmm. And still
And
is.
it still is. And it went from authoritarian to communist to now, I don't know what you would call it.
An oligarchy.
A reactionary kind of
an
party.
oligarchy.
Yeah, exactly. So it kind of has the same principles,
Mm-hmm.
but the religion really, in my opinion, doesn't really affect the political party involved. For example, let's take India. India's Hinduist mostly.
Mm-hmm.
They have a democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Although I maybe think that was influenced by the UK when it was part of the Commonwealth, definitely maybe a little link between it. For example, Muslim countries being authoritarian.
Yeah, usually that. Yeah, that's.
But
that's
that's
the
because
result.
of the segregation of the Muslim religion. For example,
And so
It's
that's
just- yeah.
so that's an interesting. So based on what you've just said, I guess my follow up would be. I mean, if for example, because Christianity got its Reformation, right? There's the Old Testament and the New Testament. Do you think that if a sort of modernization or sort of reformation of Islam came about, would that allow, or can there be a democracy even though the majority of the population is Muslim? That would be an interesting question, because since you've told me that even if a country is Christian, it doesn't have to necessarily mean it's a democracy, nor does it have to necessarily mean it's a dictatorship. Do you think that in this case Islam currently is too much is so badly structured, or its message is so?
See, the thing is that most Muslim countries, if not all, have an authoritarian state pulled up.
Yeah.
Some of them are more lenient. Take, for example, Singapore, a very diverse country that is
Still has
a third Indian, a third Muslim, and a third Chinese. They are an authoritarian state, and they are quite harsh with some rules. But it really depends on the country and how democratic the country is, if you understand how much Western culture was put in. Because if you take Iran or Pakistan or something like that, it's way harsher than take Singapore, Oman, some other countries that have been affected by Western influence. I don't think religion dictates political parties, but I definitely think there's sort of an underlying link, if you feel me.
Yeah. That's an interesting point. All right. Okay. So that was a good conversation. But now I want to move on to really what is the main part of this podcast. However, since due to time constraints, we might try to go through it as efficiently as possible. But so now let's move on to the main part of our podcast, deep dive. So where we look at really important recent news. So today is very interesting because we're going to take a look at the recent conflict between the U.S. and Iran and really delve into the potential outcomes and also why this conflict is happening, right? And so we have with us some of a couple of articles, and I was just thinking we could look at maybe causes because this is actually an interesting article from The Economist. The Economist, sorry. And so I guess I'll just read the first few sentences. All of it? No. Okay. And but basically the whole point of the article is about how Iran is currently because before the assassination there were mass protests in Iran. I think about 15,000 people were. 1,500 people were killed, approximately. I don't have the statistics in front of me right now, but there has been violence against protesters, and recently in Iran it's been ratcheting up. It's been getting worse and worse, and then came the assassination. And so what's interesting to me, right, is because we've seen how this assassination has been used to unify. So I think we should maybe go through a recap. So recap of events maybe for the audience. I mean, a lot of people know this, but okay. But so I mean, what's interesting to me, right, is Iran using this, conflict, this assassination, the death of this very popular figure inside Iran, to unify the country, to sort of suppress and lower the amount of protests going on. So even though this event has happened in an international foreign setting, they're using it for benefit back domestically speaking.
Well, yeah. Well, of course, I think it does, because he was a very prestigious general in Iran, and he was very respected. The country is authoritarian, and it mainly relies on the president.
Because I mean, Iran has a. Yeah, don't worry. No, but Iran has that's an interesting point because of course in Iran you have the religious leader, the Ayatollah, and then you have the prime minister under him. But what's interesting to see is that a lot of the coverage about this, right, has not been 100% on Iran. It has been mainly on the Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, right? The military arm of the Iranian military that funds terrorism abroad, it's it's interesting to see because a lot of people have accused the Iranian Revolutionary Guard of being like a country within a country, right? Because of just how huge its influence is, and so it's very interesting to see. Because, this General Qasem was so important to their operations. It's interesting. It's also a big concern of what...
Iran is a republic.
Islamic Republic.
Yeah, but it's a democracy. So,
I mean, it's...
It is.
I would
parliament
disagree.
And judicial system.
I would disagree that it's a... I mean, focus on the events, right?
Yeah.
Focus on the events that happened.
No, Iran has democratically elected president, a parliament, and assembly of experts.
But I mean, Ivory, that still brings me back to that still brings me back to like the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, right? Because a lot of reporters have said it's a country within a country because of just how much influence and how much power it creates and controls, and so there's a huge worry I think globally is that with the death of the general and with his passing, who will replace him? How will that affect the Islamic Revolutionary Guard? Will its will the policy in the Middle East of Iran change with because a lot of people were I mean, what's interesting is that, a lot of people were saying, oh, this assassination is terrible, and there was a lot of denouncement and there was a lot of anguish over this action. And I can't understand how people are coming from the angle that, oh, well, this is I can understand how people are coming from, oh, this is an assassination and it's in an international setting and it's probably going to cause more troubles than fix them. However, we must also consider that, this man has blood on his hands.
Yeah, no, definitely. He was accomplice of a lot of different terrorist attacks.
Yeah, and funding of terrorism.
Yeah, exactly. And he always had his hand in something.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely I think they killed him in a very, I would call it democratic way, in a very harmless weapon, only used for him and him exclusively. Because they just didn't want any more possible events being financed or planned by him.
In that case, you're referring to just how precise the assassination.
Well, yeah, they used a missile to kill him, but it was a missile that would not explode, would only shatter his car, and it ended in a successful way, only killing him and destroying his car, even though there were hundreds of people around him. And I feel like obviously killing isn't justified, but with what he did and with what he could have done in the future,
and also what
they did
because the U.S. could have exactly the U.S. could have responded in a much more aggressive or less carefully planned out way.
Yeah.
I mean, I see where you're coming from, and but I see where you're coming from, but so I mean, here we have the theme of protest, of course, and however, what's interesting is that after, because there've been retaliations for the strikes, and I mean, I don't know how much you know about the retaliations, but what's interesting to me is that how will the situation develop, because we've seen the back and forth. So the general was killed. Iran retaliated with missile strikes on U.S. bases in Iraq, and then I believe there was just general back and forth, sending of threats, some various warnings, and then of course the announcement from the U.S. president, in the Oval Office about and as a press release, and what's interesting to me is that because we're already a few days after this spike in tensions. And so really what to me is most interesting is from this sudden, outburst of aggression and of violence, are we going to see some actual long-term results come from it?
I don't think so, to be fair. But I definitely think that the presidents are hiding something. Because Trump is known for hiding stuff. Let's take, for example, the meeting that he had with the Saudi Arabian Prime Minister a couple of days before this whole incident was occurred.
So you think there's a grander strategic motive?
Well,
this?
We don't know. See, that's the problem, because no one knew about it. The Saudi Arabian and American president meeting until the Saudi Arabian president tweeted about it and what they did. It was never on any official calendars or schedules.
Yeah,
and some kind of fearing the same. For example, when Iran airstrike the Iraqi base, the Iraqi American bases, there was actually they say there was no casualties. Trump said everyone's okay, everylything's good.
And then there's counterclaims. Really know
that's happening?
Yeah, and then
because a lot of people think, he's lying, but you don't really know until someone else finds out for you.
I mean that's an interesting theme to bring into this discussion. The whole idea of disinformation, right? And the whole idea of disinformation, because we've seen we've definitely seen examples of it, right? We've seen examples of disinformation not only when it comes to the Middle East itself, but on more other diplomatic fronts. And what's interesting to me is that how do we proceed from there? Because Trump took a very I think, at least in my opinion, he took a pretty pretty calculated decision in his press release to, you know, sort of back off. Because it created this sort of wiggle room, right? This maneuver.
Yeah.
So that he could potentially try to renegotiate the Iran nuclear deal. Now, because he's been vocal about being against it and calling it one of the worst deals in American history. And however, now it's interesting because, you know, he's talked about replacing it, or he's talked about completely ignoring it and doing what he wants. However, it's interesting to see how, with this sudden offering of like, hey, I'm willing to negotiate, is he actually going to try to do a hard effort?
It's very unusual for his persona to just freely accept defeat in some sort of way and
by that you mean not retaliate
exactly
back.
Like not hitting back, especially after the strike and the Ukrainian Airlines crash that they caused. It's very unusual. So maybe he's not doing anything. Maybe he's holding back.
Yeah, or maybe
because
he's stalling,
also the American public didn't want any wars to go on, or maybe he's just planning on something that no one knows. See, that's where we just don't know, because he says, well, if we go to war, the impeachment won't really happen. It will help delay or just not impeach me at all. But you don't know. You never know with that guy.
I mean, that's an issue we've seen with this event. Yeah, and but you definitely make a good point. However, you know, I mean, it's going to be important to see where this leads to. However, you know, as you've mentioned it pretty well, there's currently a lot we don't know.
Yeah, definitely.
And so thank you everybody for joining us today on our podcast. We hope that you learned something from this. We hope that, and I personally hope that you enjoyed, meeting our my new co-host Dante. And if you did like the show, if you like to support us or maybe come on and, you know, join a conversation or speak about a specific topic, remember to email us and remember to subscribe to us on YouTube and like, comment, and subscribe. And thank you so much for joining us. We will see you in the next episode. Bye.
All right, see you guys.